When I heard my husband's phone ringing from inside my sister's purse, I didn't scream. I just stood there, frozen, holding a plate I suddenly couldn't feel in my hands. The sound itself was ordinary, a soft vibration, a familiar chime I'd heard 1,000 times before, but it didn't belong where it was coming from, not from her purse, not from the sister who had hugged me at the door 10 minutes earlier, kissed my cheek, and asked if I needed help in the kitchen. For a moment, I told myself it was nothing, that my ears were tired, that grief from a long week at work was playing tricks on me. But my heart had already begun to beat differently, slower, heavier, like it knew something my mind wasn't ready to touch yet. The plate slipped from my fingers and clattered into the sink. No one noticed. Laughter floated in from the living room. My husband's laugh, my sister's laugh, too close together. I dried my hands on a dish towel that smelled faintly of lemon soap and stood there, staring at the purse hanging from the back of the chair. Brown leather, worn corners, the same purse she'd carried for years. The sound had stopped now, leaving behind a silence that pressed against my ears. "Get it," my husband called from the couch. "Might be important." Important. I turned slowly, my pulse loud enough that I was sure someone could hear it. I reached for the purse, my fingers trembling just enough to annoy me. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I trusted my husband, that I trusted my sister. I always had. But when I opened that purse, the first thing I saw was not lipstick or keys or loose receipts. It was my husband's phone, face up, screen glowing, my name lighting it from the inside. Before that night, my life had been ordinary in the way that feels safe. Not exciting, not perfect, but steady. I'd been married to Daniel for 14 years, 14 years of shared grocery lists, quiet Sunday mornings, and the kind of arguments that end with one person sleeping on the couch but still making coffee for the other in the morning. We lived in a modest house with beige walls and creaky floors, the kind of place where you learn which step to avoid at night so it doesn't squeal. I liked it that way, predictable, warm, ours. My sister, Lila, had always been a constant in my life. She was 3 years younger, louder, more expressive. Where I was careful, she was bold. Where I paused, she leapt. Growing up, people used to say we balanced each other out. After her divorce 2 years earlier, she'd been around more. Sunday dinners, random weekday visits. Sometimes she'd just show up with a bag of groceries and say, "I didn't feel like eating alone." Daniel welcomed her easily. He was like that, open, generous with his time. He fixed the loose hinge on her cabinet, helped her carry boxes when she moved apartments, listened when she talked. Maybe a little too well, if I'm honest. But at the time, I was grateful. We didn't have children. It wasn't by choice, but it was a reality we'd learned to live with gently. Lila had 2 boys, teenagers who barely looked up from their phones. Having her around filled the quiet spaces I sometimes pretended not to notice. The night everything changed was supposed to be just another family dinner, nothing fancy, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans cooked a little too long, the kind of meal you make when you're not trying to impress anyone. Daniel had been acting strange for weeks by then, though I didn't have a word for it yet. Just off. He'd misplaced his phone more often, left the room to take calls, claimed the battery was dying even when he'd just unplugged it. 2 days before that dinner, I'd asked him about it. "It's broken," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "Battery shot, screen freezes. I'm thinking of replacing it." "Oh," I replied, "that's why you've been missing calls?" He nodded, too quickly. I believed him, or maybe I chose to. That night, while I cooked, Lila sat at the counter sipping wine, talking about her job. Daniel hovered nearby, tasting the gravy, teasing me about using too much pepper. It all felt normal, comforting even. I remember noticing how close they stood, how often their eyes met. I brushed the thought away. Family stands close. Family laughs together. During dinner, Daniel's phone never left his pocket. He didn't check it once. That should have been my first real clue. He used to glance at it constantly, even when there was nothing to see. After we ate, Lila helped clear the table. She set her purse on the chair by the kitchen wall, the same place she always did. Daniel went to the living room to turn on the TV. That's when the phone rang. At first, I thought it was hers, but the sound, Daniel's ringtone, a simple tone I'd chosen years ago, made my stomach tighten. "Get it," he called again, distracted like it didn't matter. I opened the purse slowly, my hands cold now, my chest tight. There it was, Daniel's phone. I didn't look at the screen again, I didn't answer it, I just closed the purse and stood there, my back against the counter, breathing through something sharp and rising inside me. Lila walked back into the kitchen, drying her hands. "Oh," she said, too casually, "that must be mine buzzing." I looked at her then, really looked. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I think it's Daniel's," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She laughed, a quick, brittle sound. "Oh, yeah, he asked me to hold on to it earlier, said his pocket was bothering him." I nodded, slowly, carefully. Daniel appeared in the doorway. His face changed the moment he saw the purse in my hand. Just for a second, but I saw it. Fear. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "just fine." I handed Lila the purse back. She thanked me, too quickly, and busied herself with the sink. The phone never rang again that night, but nothing in my life ever felt quiet after that. That was the moment something shifted, when trust cracked just enough for doubt to seep in. I didn't confront them, I didn't cry, I finished the dishes, I smiled when they joked, I hugged my sister goodbye. And when I lay in bed next to my husband, listening to his breathing, I realized I didn't know who either one of them were anymore. Not really. Sleep did not come easily that night. Daniel lay beside me, his back turned, breathing slow and even as if nothing in the world had shifted. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks in the plaster I'd never bothered to fix, counting them like they might anchor me to something solid. Every sound felt louder, the ticking clock on the nightstand, the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, even the soft rustle of the sheets when Daniel shifted his leg made my heart jump. I told myself I was overreacting, that there was an explanation. There always is when you love someone long enough. You learn to smooth over the sharp edges. You learn to trust first and question later. Still, when Daniel reached for me in his sleep, his hand brushing my arm, I flinched. The next morning, I watched him get ready for work like I was watching a stranger perform a familiar routine. He shaved at the sink, humming under his breath, drank his coffee too fast, checked his pockets twice before leaving. "Did you find your phone?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He paused, just a fraction of a second. "No," he said, "must have left it at the office." I nodded, though my chest tightened. He leaned in and kissed my forehead the way he always did, then grabbed his keys and left. The house felt too quiet after the door closed. I spent the day moving through my chores in a fog, folding laundry, wiping counters already clean. I replayed the moment in the kitchen over and over, searching for details I might have missed. Lila's smile, Daniel's face in the doorway, the way the phone had been face up, not tucked away. By the afternoon, doubt had settled into me like a slow ache. I called Lila. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, sis." "Hi," I said. "I just wanted to check in. You okay?" "Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't I be?" "No reason," I replied. "Just, you left your purse here last night. I forgot to give it back." There was a pause. Too long. "Oh," she said. "I'll swing by later." Her voice was light, but something underneath it felt strained. I hung up with my heart thudding, my stomach tight. When she arrived that evening, she didn't come in. She stood on the porch, shifting her weight, eyes darting past me into the house. "Thanks," she said, taking the purse quickly. "I was in a rush last night." "No problem," I said. "You sure you're okay?" She smiled again, that same careful smile. "Always." She left without another word. That night, I made dinner and waited for Daniel. He came home later than usual, claiming a meeting ran long. He ate quietly, avoiding my eyes. His phone sat on the table beside him, whole and working, the screen lighting up now and then with notifications he didn't open. I watched him, my chest heavy. "You said your phone was broken," I said. He looked up. "What?" "Your phone," I repeated. "You said it wasn't working." "Oh, I just rebooted it. You know how these things are." I nodded, again, too easily. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay there listening to the rain tap against the windows. My mind raced, but my body felt numb. I didn't want to know the truth. Not really. Knowing meant choosing what came next. Still, something inside of me had already decided. The next morning, while Daniel showered, I picked up his phone. My hands shook as I entered the code, our anniversary, the same one he'd used for years. It unlocked instantly, like it always had. The home screen looked normal, no suspicious apps, no obvious messages. For a moment, I felt foolish, ashamed. Then I opened the messages. I didn't scroll far. Her name was there, Lila. Dozens of messages, missed calls, photos. My breath caught as I tapped the thread. The words blurred together at first, my eyes refusing to focus. Inside jokes, complaints about me, small at first, then sharper. Late-night confessions, plans. "I hate lying to her," Daniel had written. "She's strong," Lila replied. "She'll survive." A photo loaded slowly, the screen bright against the dim room. It was of them two, close together, smiling, her head on his shoulder, taken in my living room. I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone heavy in my hands, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. The shower turned off. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and lay there staring at the wall as Daniel stepped out, towel around his waist, humming. I didn't confront him, not then. I needed to breathe, to think, to understand how the two people I trusted most had woven a lie so seamlessly into my life. Over the next few days, I watched them both carefully. I noticed things I'd once ignored, the way Daniel smiled when his phone buzzed, the way Lila avoided my gaze when we spoke, the tension that hung in the air when all three of us were together. I didn't cry, not yet. I waited. Because betrayal, I was learning, reveals itself slowly, and I wanted to see it clearly before I decided what to do with it. Waiting became its own kind of pain. Every morning I woke with the same dull weight in my chest, like something heavy had settled there overnight and refused to move. I went to work, answered emails, smiled at coworkers. I came home, cooked dinner, asked Daniel about his day. I even laughed at the right moments. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. Once you know the truth, or even part of it, you start seeing your life differently. Conversations replay themselves in your head with new meaning. Gestures you once found harmless begin to itch. Silence becomes suspicious. Daniel started guarding his phone more carefully, though he probably thought he was being subtle. He kept it face down now, took it with him when he went to the bathroom, stepped outside to take calls, his voice dropping when I opened the door. Lila stopped dropping by unannounced. When I invited her for coffee one afternoon, she hesitated before agreeing. When she arrived, she hugged me stiffly, her perfume, something floral and sweet, lingering too long in the air. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd laughed with Daniel over dinner so many times. She talked about work, about the boys, about nothing that mattered. Her hands shook when she lifted her mug. "You okay?" I asked gently. She nodded too fast. Just tired. I watched her closely, studying the familiar lines around her eyes, the familiar shape of her mouth. This was my sister, the girl I shared a bedroom with growing up, the woman who'd cried on my couch when her marriage fell apart. "How's Daniel?" she asked finally. "Fine," I said. "Busy." She nodded, staring into her coffee like it might answer for her. We sat in silence for a moment, the clock ticking loudly on the wall. "Lila," I said, my voice soft, careful, "is there something you want to tell me?" Her eyes flicked up, fear flashing across her face before she masked it. "No, why would there be?" I could have ended it right there, could have laid the truth on the table and watched it shatter between us, but something held me back. Maybe it was shock? Maybe it was the desperate hope that if I waited long enough, the story might change. "Just checking," I said. "You seemed distant." She smiled weakly. "Life gets like that." When she left, I stood at the door long after her car disappeared down the street. That night, Daniel came home late again. He said he'd stop by a friend's place. He kissed my cheek, smelling faintly of her perfume. I didn't mention it. Instead, I went to bed early, my heart aching in a way that felt deeper than anger. Betrayal doesn't always explode. Sometimes it erodes you slowly, grain by grain. The breaking point came a week later. Daniel told me he was working late. Lila texted that she couldn't make dinner with her boys because one of them was sick. The lies lined up too neatly, like pieces of a puzzle snapping into place. I didn't plan to follow him. I didn't grab my keys with purpose or rehearse what I'd say. I just found myself in the car, my hands steady on the wheel, my heart pounding. I followed him across town, past familiar streets, into a neighborhood I didn't recognize. He parked outside a small apartment building, didn't check over his shoulder, didn't hesitate. I parked down the street and waited. When Lila's car pulled in minutes later, my breath caught in my throat. They greeted each other like this wasn't new, like this wasn't wrong. He leaned in, kissed her cheek. She laughed, brushing his arm. I watched from the car, tears blurring my vision, my chest tight with a pain so sharp it almost felt physical. Every memory of family dinners and shared holidays pressed in on me at once. They went inside together. I don't know how long I sat there. 10 minutes, an hour. Time lost its shape. Eventually, I drove home. That was the night I cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears that soaked into my pillow as I stared at the dark. I mourned more than my marriage. I mourned the sister I thought I had, the life I thought was solid. In the days that followed, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, but beneath it grew something steadier, resolve. I began gathering what I needed, not to hurt them, but to protect myself. I copied messages, saved photos, wrote down dates and times. I opened a separate bank account in my name and quietly started moving money. I spoke to a lawyer during my lunch break, my voice calm even as my hands trembled. I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't confront Lila. I waited for the right moment. It came sooner than I expected. Daniel suggested we host a family dinner, his idea, not mine. Said it would be nice to have everyone together, Lila included. I agreed. That night, I cooked the same meal I always did: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. I set the table carefully, smoothing the tablecloth, lighting candles. When they arrived, I greeted them with a smile. Lila avoided my eyes. Daniel kissed my cheek. We ate, we talked, we laughed. The lie sat between us, thick and heavy, waiting. After dessert, I stood and cleared my throat. "I have something I'd like to say," I said. They both looked up, startled. I reached into my pocket and placed Daniel's phone on the table, face up. The room went very quiet. The sound of the phone touching the table felt louder than it should have. a dull, final thud, like a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. Daniel's face drained of color. Leela's fork slipped from her fingers and clattered against her plate. No one spoke. The candles flickered, their flames trembling just slightly in the sudden stillness. "I found your messages," I said quietly. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake, it didn't rise. It came out calm, almost gentle, the way you speak when you're handling something fragile. Daniel swallowed hard. "I can explain." Leela's eyes filled with tears instantly. She reached for her napkin, pressing it to her mouth like she was trying to hold herself together. "Explain what? The lies? Or the part where you both decided I didn't deserve the truth?" Daniel stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I said. I looked at Leela then, my sister, my blood. "How long?" I asked her. She shook her head, tears spilling now. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "That's not an answer." Her shoulders slumped. "A year," she whispered, "just over a year." "A year?" I nodded slowly, letting the number settle into me. 14 years of marriage, undone quietly over 12 months of stolen moments and borrowed trust. Daniel reached for my hand. I pulled it back. "You told me your phone was broken," I said, turning to him. "You let me feel stupid for even wondering. You let her carry it in her purse." He looked down at the floor. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. You don't accidentally betray someone for a year. Leela stood up then, her chair wobbling. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I was lonely. He was there. You were always so strong. I thought you'd be okay." Those words cut deeper than anything else. I took a step back, my hands curling into fists. "I thought you'd be okay losing my husband and my sister?" She sobbed openly now. Daniel moved toward her, instinctively protective. That alone told me everything I needed to know. "Stop," I said. They froze. "I invited you here because I wanted this to be honest, not dramatic, not cruel, just honest." I picked up the phone and slid it toward Daniel. "I've saved everything, the messages, the photos, the dates." Daniel's head snapped up. "Why would you do that?" I said because I needed to know what I was dealing with and because I needed to protect myself. Silence filled the room again. "I've spoken to a lawyer," I added. "I've opened my own account. I know exactly where I stand." Leela's sobbing slowed, replaced by a look of panic. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, meeting her eyes, "that I won't be lied to anymore." I turned to Daniel. "You'll move out by the end of the week." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. "And you," I said to Leela, my voice softer now, "are no longer welcome in my home." She nodded, broken. "I understand." They left that night without another word. No shouting, no slammed doors, just the quiet sound of betrayal finally being named. After they were gone, I sat alone at the table. The candles burned low, wax pooling around their bases. I felt empty, not relieved, not angry, just tired. The next days passed in a blur. Daniel packed his things. He tried to talk, apologies, explanations, promises, but I kept my distance. Words had lost their power. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend with speech. Leela sent long messages, emails, voicemails. I didn't answer any of them. The story spread as these things do. Family members called. Some were sympathetic, some were uncomfortable. A few suggested forgiveness, as if betrayal was a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with time. I didn't argue. I simply said, "I'm taking care of myself." Weeks turned into months. The house felt different without Daniel. Quieter, lighter in some ways, lonelier in others. I rearranged the furniture, painted the spare room, donated things we'd collected together. I started therapy, sat in a small office with soft lighting, and told my story out loud, hearing it in my own voice for the first time. Leela stopped reaching out eventually. I heard through family that she and Daniel were together now, that they'd moved in, that things were complicated. I wished them no harm. I focused on rebuilding my life piece by piece. I took walks in the evenings, learned to cook meals just for myself, let myself grieve without rushing it. One afternoon, months later, I ran into Leela at the grocery store. We stood awkwardly in the produce aisle, the air heavy with everything unsaid. "I never meant to destroy you," she said quietly. "I know," I replied, "but intent doesn't change impact." She nodded, tears in her eyes. We parted without another word. Time didn't erase the betrayal, but it softened its edges. I began to sleep through the night again, to laugh without guilt, to imagine a future that didn't include either of them. Healing, I learned, isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing yourself when others didn't. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, in small, unremarkable moments that surprised me by how much they mattered. It was the first morning I woke up without reaching for Daniel's side of the bed. The first evening I cooked a meal and realized I didn't miss his opinion about the seasoning. The first time I laughed with a friend and felt the sound come from somewhere real, not forced. The house became mine again. I changed the locks, not out of fear, but as a statement. I hung new curtains that let in more light. I planted herbs in the small patch of soil by the back door, pressing my hands into the dirt and breathing in the clean, grounding smell of earth. I began to understand how much of myself I'd given away over the years, not just to Daniel, but to the idea of being needed, being forgiving, being the strong one. In therapy, my counselor asked me once, "What would you have done if you discovered the truth earlier?" I thought about it for a long time. "I would have trusted myself," I said finally. That realization stayed with me. Months after the confrontation, Daniel called. His name lit up my phone, and for a moment my heart stumbled. Then it steadied. "I won't take long," he said when I answered. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "I just wanted to say, I see now what I did. I lost more than I realized." "I know," I said. There was a pause. "Are you happy?" I looked around my living room, the soft light, the quiet, the sense of peace I'd worked hard to build. "I'm at peace," I said, "and that's enough." We hung up. I didn't cry. As for Leela, our relationship never returned to what it was, and that was something I had to mourn separately. She reached out again once, on my birthday, sending a simple message, "I hope you're well." I replied with the same. Some doors close not because we're angry, but because walking through them again would mean losing ourselves. A year later, I took a solo trip for the first time in my life, just a small coastal town, nothing extravagant. I spent mornings walking along the shore, listening to the waves, letting the wind tangle my hair. I wrote in a journal. I slept deeply. One evening, sitting on a bench overlooking the water, I thought back to that moment in the kitchen, the phone ringing from inside my sister's purse, how the world had tilted on its axes in a matter of seconds. I realized then that betrayal had taught me something I might never have learned otherwise. That love without honesty is not love, that loyalty means nothing without respect, and that strength isn't about enduring pain quietly, it's about knowing when to walk away. When I returned home, I started volunteering at a local community center, helping women who were navigating their own difficult transitions, divorce, loss, starting over. I didn't give advice, I listened. Sometimes that's all we need. Life didn't become perfect. There were still lonely nights, moments when old memories surfaced unexpectedly. But there was also joy, real, grounded joy that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. One afternoon, as I watered the herbs by my back door, my phone rang. A new ringtone this time, one I'd chosen for myself. I smiled as I answered, the sun warm on my face. I was no longer afraid of what might be on the other end of the line because I trusted myself again. There are moments in life that divide us quietly into a before and an after. Not with noise, not with spectacle, just a soft internal click, like a door closing somewhere deep inside you. For me, it was the moment I realized I would never again look at a ringing phone the same way. For a long time after everything happened, even harmless sounds startled me. A vibration on a table, a phone buzzing in another room. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. That kind of betrayal teaches your nervous system lessons your heart never asked for. But healing, I learned, is not about erasing those reactions. It's about learning how to live gently alongside them. I used to think forgiveness meant reopening doors, letting people back in, pretending nothing had changed so everyone else could feel comfortable again. I wore forgiveness like armor, believing it made me strong. What I know now is this: forgiveness can also mean releasing someone from your life without hatred, without revenge, without needing them to understand your pain in order for it to be valid. Some people don't deserve a front row seat to your healing. When I look back on my marriage, I don't rewrite it as a lie. There was love there, real moments, shared mornings, inside jokes that once meant something. I honor those memories without letting them excuse what came after. And when I think of my sister, the grief is quieter now. It doesn't stab anymore. It aches in a distant way, like an old injury that reminds you of the weather. I loved her deeply. I still do, in a different shape. But love doesn't require access. Boundaries are not punishments. They are self-respect made visible. I know some people listening to my story will be wondering if I was too calm, too composed, too forgiving. Others will think I should have shouted, exposed, humiliated, destroyed. But this is the truth I came to understand. I didn't need to break them to rebuild myself. Walking away with dignity was my revenge. Choosing peace was my justice. If you're listening to this and you're in the middle of something similar, if your intuition has been whispering to you while the people you trust tell you you're imagining things, I want you to hear this clearly. Your awareness is not betrayal. Your questions are not disloyal. Your need for truth does not make you difficult. And if the truth, when it finally arrives, changes the way you see the people you love, allow yourself to grieve without shame. You're not weak for feeling it deeply. You're human. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being betrayed by more than one person at once. It makes you question your judgment, your worth, your place in your own life. But loneliness does not mean you are unlovable. It means you are between chapters. I stand here now, not untouched, not unchanged, but whole in a way I wasn't before. Not because what happened made me stronger, but because I chose myself when staying would have cost me everything. If someone you trusted chose secrecy over honesty, if someone you loved asked you to swallow pain so they could avoid discomfort, if someone looked at your loyalty and saw an opportunity instead of a responsibility, that says everything about them and nothing about your value. Life after betrayal is quieter, but it's also clearer. You hear yourself again. And that voice, the one that warned you, the one that hurt, the one that survived, that voice deserves your loyalty now. So I'll leave you with this question, not to judge yourself, but to reflect honestly. If you had discovered the truth the way I did, if the phone had rung from the wrong place, if the lie had revealed itself in a moment you couldn't ignore, would you have chosen confrontation? Would you have chosen forgiveness? Or would you have chosen yourself? Tell me in the comments. Your story matters here. And if this story touched something tender in you, if it made you feel seen or understood or a little less alone, please consider subscribing. These stories are told so we can remember that even in betrayal, dignity is possible and healing is real. Thank you for listening. There are stories that end loudly, with slammed doors and raised voices, and then there are stories that linger. They follow you into grocery aisles, into quiet evenings, into the small decisions you make without realizing they're shaped by old wounds. This one stayed with me. Long after the house settled into its new rhythm, after the paint dried and the herbs grew tall enough to brush my fingers when I walked past, I found myself thinking about the versions of myself that had existed inside that marriage. The woman who trusted easily, the sister who defended fiercely, the wife who believed that love, once chosen, protected you from everything else. I don't judge her anymore. For a while I did. I replayed moments and scolded myself for not seeing the signs sooner, for laughing at jokes that now felt cruel in hindsight, for opening my door so easily to people who were quietly planning to leave through it together. But blame is a heavy thing to carry, especially when it belongs to someone who was only loving the way she knew how. One afternoon, months after everything had settled, I found an old notebook tucked into a drawer. Inside were half-written letters. To Daniel, to Leela, to no one in particular. Words I'd poured out during sleepless nights when my heart was louder than my reason. I sat on the floor and read them slowly. Some were angry, some were tender, some were desperate in a way that made my chest ache. I didn't recognize the voice in all of them, but I honored it. That voice had needed somewhere to land. I didn't send any of those letters. Instead, I burned them in the fireplace, one by one, watching the paper curl and darken, the ink disappearing into ash, not to erase the pain, but to release it from having to speak anymore. Closure doesn't always come from conversations. Sometimes it comes from knowing you said enough, even if no one else heard it. There were still moments when memory caught me off guard. A song on the radio Daniel used to love, a holiday recipe Leela and I used to make together. For a split second, my body reacted before my mind did, but then the moment passed. Grief, I learned, doesn't mean you want things back the way they were. It just means something mattered. And it did matter. I won't pretend I emerged untouched. Trust became something I handled more carefully, like fine china instead of everyday plates. I paid closer attention to how people showed up when no one was watching. I listened more. To words, yes, but also to pauses, to discomfort, to the places where truth hesitated. That awareness didn't make me colder. It made me clearer. People sometimes ask if I believe Daniel and Leela are happy now. I don't know, and more importantly, I don't need to know. Their story is no longer tied to mine. What I do know is this: happiness built on secrecy has a fragile foundation. Eventually something cracks, a sound from the wrong place, a truth that refuses to stay hidden. And when that happens, everyone involved must decide who they're willing to become next. As for me, I became someone quieter, someone steadier, someone who no longer confuses loyalty with self-sacrifice. I learned that love should never require you to shrink your awareness, that honesty is not a favor, it's a baseline, and that being the strong one doesn't mean absorbing other people's damage without complaint. Strength can also look like walking away calmly, carrying only what belongs to you. Today, when my phone rings, I answer it without fear, not because betrayal can happen again, but because I trust myself to respond if it does. I trust my ability to notice, to pause, to choose. That trust is the real gift I carried out of the wreckage. If my story leaves you with anything, I hope it's this quiet permission. You are allowed to change after the truth finds you. You are allowed to love differently. You are allowed to protect your peace without apology. And if one day something rings from the wrong place in your life, if a truth reveals itself in a way you can't ignore, may you meet that moment, not with fear, but with clarity. Because clarity, once earned, is something no one can take from you. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes after everything has been said. Not the peaceful kind you imagine when you're still in the middle of chaos, but a softer, heavier silence, one that asks you who you are now that you're no longer reacting, no longer bracing yourself. That silence took some getting used to. In the early days, I filled it without realizing I was doing so. I kept the television on even when I wasn't watching it. I played music while I cooked, while I showered, while I folded laundry that didn't need folding yet. Noise felt safer than stillness. Stillness had too much room for memory. But slowly, almost without permission, the silence changed its shape. It stopped feeling like absence and started feeling like space. Space to notice things I'd ignored for years, the way sunlight moved across the living room wall in the late afternoon, the way my shoulders felt less tense when I wasn't waiting for someone else's mood to shift, the way my own laughter sounded when it wasn't measured or careful. I began to realize how much of myself I had edited over the years, not just for my husband, not just for my sister, but for the idea of keeping everything smooth, keeping everyone comfortable, keeping the peace at my own expense. There's a quiet grief in recognizing how often you chose silence instead of honesty because you believed love required it. One evening, while reorganizing a closet, I found an old sweater of Daniel's. It still smelled faintly like his cologne. For a moment, my chest tightened, not with longing, but with recognition. This was a life I had lived, and it was okay to acknowledge that without wanting it back. I folded the sweater neatly and placed it in a donation bag. When I dropped it off the next day, I didn't feel dramatic or brave. I just felt done. Done is an underrated form of freedom. As time passed, people stopped asking about the divorce in hushed tones. My story became old news, replaced by newer dramas, newer whispers. I was grateful for that, not because I was ashamed, but because I no longer wanted my pain to be a topic of conversation. I wanted my life to be quiet again, ordinary, mine. There were moments, of course, when the past resurfaced unexpectedly, a mutual acquaintance mentioning Daniel's name, a family gathering where Leela's absence sat like an unspoken sentence. I learned how to breathe through those moments without collapsing into them. I learned that healing doesn't mean you stop feeling, it means feelings stop controlling you. One afternoon, I received a message from a woman I barely knew, a friend of a friend. She said she'd heard my story and wanted to thank me, not for being strong, but for being honest. She was in the middle of her own discovery, her own unraveling, and she said hearing that someone else had survived made her feel less afraid. I sat with that message for a long time. We don't always realize who is watching us choose ourselves. We don't know whose courage is quietly borrowing from ours, and we don't need to know. Living honestly is enough. I never remarried, not because I closed myself off, but because I stopped measuring my life by what it lacked. Love came in other forms, friendships that didn't require performance, routines that felt grounding, moments of connection that didn't come with conditions. And yes, there were dates, awkward ones, kind ones, ones that reminded me that trust isn't rebuilt all at once, it's rebuilt in pieces through consistency and respect. I took my time. If there's one thing betrayal teaches you well, it's patience with yourself. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see before. The worst part of what happened wasn't that my husband chose someone else, or that my sister crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The worst part was how close I came to doubting my own reality. And the best part, the unexpected gift, was reclaiming it. I trust my instincts now, not blindly, not fearfully, but with quiet confidence. I listen when something feels off. I don't rush to explain it away. I don't hand my certainty to someone else just because it's easier. That trust is something no one can betray anymore. If you're listening to this part of my story, maybe it's because you've already lived through your own version of it, or maybe you're standing at the edge of something you don't yet have words for. If that's you, I want you to know this. You don't have to rush your healing to make other people comfortable. You don't owe clarity to those who chose confusion, and you don't have to become bitter to become wise. Life will ask you again and again who you are willing to be when the truth shows up uninvited. When it does, I hope you remember this. There is life after betrayal. There is softness after strength, and there is a version of you waiting on the other side who knows how to stand alone without feeling lonely. That version is worth choosing every single time. After months of quiet rebuilding, life began to feel steady again. Not perfect, not idyllic, but solid in a way I hadn't realized I needed. I started waking up without that sinking feeling in my chest, without the instinctive dread that came from knowing the people I loved most had betrayed me. Coffee in the morning tasted richer, not because it was stronger, but because I could finally taste it without distraction. The sunlight that streamed through the kitchen window no longer felt like a reminder of absence. It felt like warmth I'd earned. One of the hardest lessons I learned was that I couldn't reclaim the past. I couldn't turn back time to erase the lies or force Daniel and Lila to feel remorse the way I wanted them to. I couldn't go back to the moment when their deceit first collided with my life and stop it. I had no power over them, only over myself. And that was enough. I began to notice other things about myself, things I had buried under anger, grief, and attempts to maintain appearances. My creativity, for instance, which had lain dormant for years. I picked up the brush again and painted simple landscapes, letting the colors reflect the quiet of the house, the calm of mornings spent alone. I discovered that the act of creating could replace some of the longing I had once felt for a relationship that had been honest and open. I also started volunteering at a local community center, helping women navigating transitions of their own: divorce, infidelity, broken trust. Their stories mirrored pieces of mine, and in listening, in offering a hand or a kind word, I began to feel the weight of my own experiences ease. There was a strange kind of healing in knowing that someone else could learn from my survival, that my journey wasn't just about loss, but about resilience. Not every day was easy. Some evenings I would sit alone on the porch with a glass of wine, and the memory of that phone ringing from Lila's purse would come unbidden. I would remember the sharp pang in my chest, the betrayal layered over years of love and trust. Some nights tears came quietly. Other nights I would catch myself laughing at the absurdity of what had happened, how meticulous the deception had been, how human they were in their flaws, and how human I was in my suffering. One evening, I received a text from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. She said, "I heard what happened. I just wanted to check in. You're stronger than you know." I stared at the message for a long time. Stronger than I knew. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had spent so long feeling broken that I forgot to measure my own strength. I replied simply, "Thank you. That means a lot." It was during this period of reflection and cautious rebuilding that I met someone new, not in a dramatic way, not in a whirlwind of instant chemistry, just in the quiet, steady way life sometimes surprises you when you're no longer looking for it. We met at a local library. He was researching a project, and I was browsing for inspiration for my painting. We started talking about art, about books, about life in ways that felt safe and unhurried. Over time, our conversations became longer, our walks more frequent. I discovered that I could trust again slowly, selectively, and without fear of losing myself in someone else. This new connection taught me another lesson, that trust and love are not opposites of independence, they can coexist. You can give yourself to someone else while keeping your boundaries intact, while honoring your own voice and reality. That balance had been impossible in my marriage with Daniel. Now it felt natural. I also began to see the larger patterns in my life, the ones I had ignored because I was busy surviving day to day. I realized that I had tolerated deception in small ways long before the big betrayal. I had bent over backward for the sake of peace, often silencing my instincts, convincing myself that harmony was worth more than honesty. I don't regret the choices I made then, they were what I knew at the time, but I vowed never to ignore that inner voice again. There were quiet victories too. I reconnected with family members who had felt awkward or distant during the drama. I apologized where apologies were due, not to Daniel or Lila, but to myself for the years I allowed my identity to be overwritten by their actions. Even Lila faded completely from my life over time. No dramatic confrontation, no public humiliation, just absence. That, I realized, was the peace I had been seeking all along. Sometimes closure comes not from confrontation, but from letting people go and reclaiming your own space. The house itself became a sanctuary. I repainted walls in warm tones. I rearranged furniture so that the rooms felt open and airy. I planted flowers and herbs, and each time something grew, I felt a sense of quiet accomplishment that had nothing to do with anyone else. My home was finally my own, and it reflected the new version of myself I was becoming. One night, as I sat in the backyard listening to the cicadas and the gentle hum of the evening, I realized I was laughing at something silly I had read online, and I felt it fully. Not the nervous, half-hearted laughter I had forced in the past, but a true, unguarded laugh. It was a small moment, but it was enormous in its meaning. It told me that I had survived the worst, that I had reclaimed the quiet center of my life, and that I could feel joy again, untainted by fear or betrayal. As I stood up and walked back into the house, I noticed the clock ticking softly on the wall, the same one I had once listened to during sleepless nights of doubt and heartache. It no longer felt oppressive. It felt steady, reliable, like me. I had learned to trust time again, not to bring back what was lost, but to help me build what was next. And what was next, I realized, was mine to shape.